Super Tuesday, Mr. Zeppo, podcast show of podcasts. That's right, folks. It's me, it's you. It's time to think about stuff together with words that come out of my mouth. Is that how podcasts work? That's how my podcast works. Okay, so perhaps I revealed a lot right there. I'm not trying to get you to believe what I think. I'm trying to get you to consider some of the things that I think about and then go, that makes for an interesting comic book movie idea. I'd like to give it millions of dollars, please. Why the funny voice? I don't know, because I'm a weirdo. All right. Good morning, folks. I'm having one of those days. It is Tuesday, March 3rd, 12:43 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I feel about 68% of my operational capacity is, chugging along quite painfully. And the rest of me is offline. Something I came across the internet recently that I genuinely was like, wow, someone put that into words and wants it to be go viral, wants it to be shared, wants it to be an attempt at some sort of new, or maybe not so new, commitment to an etiquette of sorts on the social media. And it was being shared by someone that, I suspect were the people who crafted these words, but it might have been a reshare. I don't know. But it goes like this. There's an introduction that someone wrote to the thing. And I just added, I came across it and felt worth sharing and discussing on the show. Quote, "Things are going to get very heated politically in the next few months, and I know I will be sorely tempted to hit back at provocative posts and memes that contain hate, put-downs, derogatory labeling of individuals, groups, etc. I want to be better than that, so I thought I would make a public commitment to hold myself accountable to a higher standard of behavior." And that alone, right there, is a noble thing worthy of applause. Like, whoever wrote that and meant it and really, felt it, and that's why they wrote it, huzzah. And, that's all I'm saying is, this is a shared experience, and no matter what scale at which we think we're interacting with each other, it's always been about being human and humane to each other at the barest minimum level, right? And also trying to be more than just that. Otherwise, life is intolerable. And we all fail, right? All of us. We're all guilty. As many of the organized religions will tell you. But that bit is true. But I digress. It goes on to read, "If you would like to join me in this initiative, copy the text below, insert your name, and then post. If you would like to add the American Eagle, the JPEG will be in the comment below." There is a very beautifully depicted American Eagle against a waving American flag. It's part of this bundle, but I digress. "A public commitment to practice verbal nonviolence on the internet. I, insert name here, commit to using the internet as a forum for civil and respectful discourse, free of hatred and divisiveness. To that end, I take responsibility for my actions and will never initiate or share posts, memes, or images or articles that disparage, demean, mock, or slander other individuals, groups, or political parties." That's so admirable, and also kind of a tall order, and also the right thing to do, right? And what's that meme that's it's super trending right now, At least it feels like it in my little bubble. And trust me, you don't need to explain to me that the internet is like carved up into demographics for individual. I'm aware. I've seen it. I've seen it in action, and I've seen it in documentary. Right, like people are aware of the kinds of weird things that the internet is and or does and or isn't. And that's why we have this this ongoing discourse. That's why it's worth it, right? This is how we, as a global village or a global tribe of tribes, because it's all one big lump of people on a rock, on a whatever shape you think it is, insert your favorite shape here, arguing about it is a psyop. Don't waste your time. It's a living womb. There's a sentient being there that you just only see 1% of, so arguing about the shape of this living womb cocoon is stupid. And it's what they want you to do. So I digress. That had nothing to do with the... I just was very judgy, and I guess I had to get it out of my system. I just kind of mocked and demeaned the whole... Well, I guess I won't get sidetracked to self-categorizing my own behavior right now. I'm just going to let it stand and get through the statement, and then we can unpack it all. Quote, I am also committed to act with integrity and will never knowingly spread misinformation, disinformation, or any communication intended to deceive or mislead my fellow Americans. To that end, I promise to verify to the extent possible the source and factual validity of any information that I share. If I mess it up, call me on it. Now, that's tricky because of many things. One of them being that as of right now, from my impartial, I've just been sitting at home doing this on the internet, looking at what I see and what other people report of seeing on the internet, vis-a-vis the macrocosm, microcosm lens that is Facebook. It seems like a lot of people do exactly the opposite of what this pledge is, right? We all can fall for it. We can all walk ourselves into an attitude of free speech and free will and destiny, and I can say what I want or type what I want at people who are reading along and or engaging in direct discussion, debate, or argumentation or fighting on the internet. And around that sort of entertaining engagement, to some might say very stressful intellectual engagement, around that we've built a like a platform of communicating with ourselves and each other that we have to hold ourselves to like a better, according to this post. I shared it. I haven't signed it. Let me tell you something, friends and listeners. I found it and wanted to talk about it on the show because someone was posting that for themselves as an actual pledge. And as aspirational pledges go, it sounds pretty awesome. But as I think I was trying to share, even the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated yourself, can be openly, publicly, out loudly rationalized into a pretty self-serving, pretty ego-driven, egocentric, pretty, pretending to be innocent kind of platform or mental position, mental strategy, mental negotiation tactic. So I wondered at the time when I came across it, like, if I read this on my show, would I feel like I could, with integrity, say that I already do that? I certainly could be accused of all the things. It occurs to me from a certain perspective. If you live in a mental reality where any form of spiritual versus religious, spiritualism, any form of that is just inherently wrong, technically inaccurate, and also perhaps probably there's a whole huge swath of people of the global demographic that believe that sort of thing is immoral. So I would be very easily in apparent, seeming, relative violation of that oath or pledge, internet pledge. Let's not take it to the level of oath. That's for appointed offices of public service and the rule of law, which I sort of don't not believe in. I just don't know that we're really doing the best that we could be doing of it in general and for most of our lives based on some really deep-seated flaws, right? But I digress. That's our great free speech of social discussion and debate is this catch-22 of being able to discuss moral imperatives, as I'm sure I've worded some of the things I've posited. As a matter of fact, some nonsense I was reading this morning felt pretty morally imperative. But while also not cramming, there's a difference between having free speech and cramming someone cramming someone else's belief down someone else's throat in some sort of weird ideological, mind abuse, ? But where do you draw lines like that? This statement, as intended, is meant to, inspire us to be our utmost best. Does that mean that I should make my show like PG-13 and take all the explicit language and or comedy out of it? Not that I'm claiming to be that funny. I honestly think that my brother's bit of literally dressing up in a suit of armor and shouting at people like some sort of bastard cousin of Homer Simpson come to life and teleported into reality through some magical suit of armor is leagues funnier than my own droning attempt at some sort of audio blog. But it is what it is, and we are what we do. Ouch. And we are, while words are cheap, we are also supposed to be living up to our word, right? We live in a weird, messed up disinformation society where we are told and indoctrinated simultaneously that words have value, but you better not believe that they have magic. Words are important, but you better not think you can wield important words. You can't. Only special people can, etc. Right? It's this hypocrisy of hypocrisies that seems to be either some deep inherent flaw to human nature and human community psychology, human psychology of community, or something else. Something else, and whatever it is, we either can heal or we can't. We either can step up to living to a higher agreed upon standard or not. We can either heal ourselves and each other or not. And that's the through line, if anything ever was, to this show. So I digress. Will I be taking this pledge, this public commitment, this internet pledge to civil, respectful discourse? I think I always have strived for being a voice of that, in that, and giving it the benefit of the doubt that we're rediscovering and creating a big, giant internet, multi-platform, multi-media version of that kind of, ongoing public discourse that was once embodied physically and literally by, sort of mob yelling matches in the public square. And sometimes still is, right? We get together and protest and counter-protest. And that's one of our most beloved freedoms, is it not? That we hope they don't take away from us, and that we espouse so much that we almost take them for granted, that we think of them as something either that we're super special and grateful to have in this place, or that everybody in the world should have, one or the other. Many disagreements abound, I suppose, about how that all's supposed to work. But for myself, if I may, pause and say that, like, I've never been one for making promises that can't be kept. I've always been clear that that this show, I think I've always been clear, perhaps redundantly so, perhaps, yes, that this show is a combination of my honest real-life opinion and sort of improv-based chit-chat, that I would rather have like 2, 3, 4 people here sitting around the table with me than just me spouting off at myself for 45 minutes at a time. And that it's sincere and authentic, but it's also meant to be embedded inside layers of literary fiction. So some of it may be sort of role-play-y literary fiction inserted in the talk, etc. So it's weird. I am developing content as I comment about real life for books that I'm developing content for. And that sentence should actually make sense. Having said all of that, I, the incorrigible Mr. Zappo, have to think about this pledge and sort of like roll it around in my noggin. I do like the eagle. There's a part of me that's anti-establishment enough to be like, all ideology is mental slavery, so that includes all that patriotism stuff, but that's bad. Can't say that patriotism is bad. That's bad. And I'm not saying anything is bad. I'm saying that, what am I saying? I'm saying that there's a time and a place, and we need structures, and we also need to be free of them. And I do agree that I'm not out to disparage anybody. I am out to make social criticism of things as I understand them. And I may be doing it in a roundabout, weird, sort of meandering kind of way. But am I slandering individuals or political parties? Well, at the ideological level, I could be easily accused of slandering political parties. When I say things like, all ideology is mental slavery. But if you listen to the part, and any of the episodes where I bring it up, I usually end up talking about how and I'll say it again just in case anyone has not heard me say this, because maybe I haven't said this on the show. Confucius, I believe, and this I hope is not an incorrect attribution, knock on wood, Confucius established a sort of like recipe, and I'm paraphrasing severely because I didn't think to have any of this material prompted and opened at the book where I remember reading this from, but essentially I remember the following from a particular passage about Confucius and his like wisdom and understanding about people as human beings living in community. Paraphrasing severely, Confucius suggested that we are programmable beings. We need programming in order to be useful and make the thing we call society function in whatever form it's taking, because everybody's form of society takes different forms. That sentence, I think, makes sense too. Right? And it's like, it makes you think. Because we don't, right, contemplate that very often. And sometimes silly things like that are actually enlightening. And I don't mean like the literal sense enlightening, but in the, they give you aha moments of like, oh, I have a deeper understanding of stuff. Totally lost track of where I was going. The enlightenment bit, that was the thing I got distracted by. Well, okay. So this pledge and free will and free speech and politics and all of it crashes in your brain, my brain at any rate sometimes. It makes me think that, I have the free will and the free speech to say certain things, like two wings, one bird, and, they're wearing white hat, black hat, good cop, bad cop kind of stuff. Is that disparagement or is that legitimate social critique? Bernie Sanders, let's pause for a moment, because this is what Super Tuesday is really about. Like, what's at stake, folks? And again, I'm not telling you which way to vote. I'm just sharing my thoughts. Y'all just go vote or don't vote. I saw, total distractionary sidebar tangent. I have to tell you about this, though. Put a pin in all those things. Bernie Sanders and what I think about what he brings to the table from, my experience of paying attention to his mouth vomit. Because everyone just, rambles and says their stuff, their political talking points. That's how politics works. But coming back to that, I saw this thing on C-SPAN or one of the C-SPANs as I was flipping through. An honest, earnest, not trying to market at you, just trying to share and be an influencer. If you've never dialed into C-SPAN and just really paid attention to your government without a bunch of people talking about it over their statements, just listening to what they actually say to each other when they debate stuff and when they introduce things and when they, have hearings, just go to C-SPAN and really listen. So sometimes the C-SPAN 3 has community event type programming from all over the place and from all over the spectrum of political ideology. It's very nonpartisan. It's not about any, you can accuse all the major news channels of having political slant. C-SPAN does not. C-SPAN is just a raw camera feed onto live civic events that have to do with the body politic and our self-education about that, right? Because that is a culture. That's a thing. That's a layer of activity in this busy thing we call a nation state that goes on all the time and that isn't covered on the news and isn't talked about in most media, but is there and is informing things at a certain level, and often, I think, really interesting and worth watching. I missed it, whatever it was, but whatever the discussion was, it was being framed by a big giant, panel discussion, poster header thing, banner, that was God, it had to have been at least 4 or 5 feet, 6 feet wide or tall. And so 11, 12, some odd. And it said something big. And it said, non-voters. And I don't remember if I got the right order or not, but it had 2 lines of text. One of them was non-voters, and the other one said America's largest voting bloc. And I don't remember if it said first, America's largest voting bloc, non-voters, or the other way around. But I like non-voters first as comedy. If I was recreating that for a scene in which I made up set a scene there for someone to debate, and then for someone with my sort of attitude about it to show up and express their thoughts, right, as a character, I would definitely put it non-voters. And then a gap, some sort of graphic gap, and then America's largest voting bloc, so that there's comedy beat. And it's one of those things that's so true and so maddeningly how come you guys don't do something with that? Like, I get it. As a person I'm a robot from the future. I can't vote in this country. I can't vote in any country. Everyone's like, who are you? I don't need that. I'm kidding. I don't vote in America because I was born in a different country, and I'm here, perfect. I have papers. I have a green card, and I'm here permanently. And all my other family members have taken the test and become citizens, and I haven't because I've always been too broke. Because it's a little expensive to take that test, and a little bit too like snarky about it. In as much as that, like, I want to stand as a voice for that particular channel of people, right? And it's integral, it's inherent, both as the comedy of like the robot from another dimension, hiding out in that demographic. Quote for my character that I'm writing, and just the general reality of my real life biography and situation. So, spoiler alert: I love this country. I love America. I love being the melting pot, actually being a part of it, and not just someone standing around talking about it, because we all are, aren't we? We're all standing around poking fun of, and or outright critiquing, and or just rage, hate posting about our society. That's what we do as people, and that's what we do as storytellers and entertainers anyways. And I think that fundamentally we need to unify at a larger scale of reference and find a fundamental building block of we are all one in just being members of the human species, which is a spiritually networked integrated oneness, and not all these different tribes and all these different families or all these different, genomically speaking, we are clones of each other. And that there's a spiritual significance to that. But I digress. What does that have to do with any of it? Everything. All of it. We all are here. We all have a voice. We all have something to say, both literally and figuratively and artistically. And this person who wrote this post is very much trying to engage the internet as a medium and say, hey, we can aspire to a better level of clarity and integrity, and we've all got to take responsibility for the fact that, believe it or not, whether you think it's a hoax or a conspiracy from only that other party or not, there's a lot of garbage out there. There really is. There's a lot of stuff that's nonsense and based on perhaps a malicious intent to create multiple lines of division and distraction and disenfranchisement, as I have previously critiqued myself, because that seems to be the agenda all the way around. Whether you think of it as a pyramidic top-down dystopia or a sort of everyone's out, to screw everybody kind of networked of everyone's doing weird things dystopia. We're living in a weird political dystopia. And as I have been saying from the beginning, Trump is a symptomology, not the cause. And they want us to fixate on those individuals as characters the way you fixate on your favorite characters in a soap opera and root for them and or defend them and or rationalize their behavior and or be shocked and amazed by it and or otherwise get caught up in the rhythm of the drama that is the playing out of the selection of those who sit in the throne of political theater. Now, I would like to be clear. In my thesis, there is this conjunction, right? Like duality and non-duality constantly coexist. They're not mutually exclusive. I mean that at all levels, especially when I throw like a critique. Anytime I've ever said, such and such critique of an institution or a public figure, or it's modified by the following sort of spiritual assertions that are considered read in and taken for granted from my perspective. That each of us is literally a talking meat puppet within which both the evil thing and the good thing, the light and the dark, the force and the empire, the Jedis and the empire are like the little devils and angels are perpetually, truly, like within us, in a yin yang swirl of mutual co-creation, establishing what we experience, what we project out, what we receive back in, who and what we are, and who and what we become, and who and how it is that we do stuff. And that fundamental to everyone in public life, under the public lens, being themselves, because humans literally live and breathe as like anecdote for themselves, for ourselves. We become symbols, right? Like this thesis includes this meta spiritual thing. If Donald Trump is a symptomology of something, then everyone in public life is, to a certain extent or another, because we are all sort of mirrors to each other and reflective of the symptomology that we see in varying degrees all the way around to one another in macrocosm and microcosm and everything in between. Why is that important? Because that's what makes us who we are, in my opinion, humbly speaking. And it's what makes us capable of both getting hijacked by the evil empire, whatever you want to call them. And it's like it isn't even about any specific group of humans, right? Like it's an energetic, metacosmological thing. The dark side is doing what the dark side does, as it expresses itself in all life, because it is necessary. The two, as some have postulated in various forms, are like conjoined twins, and thus can't really eradicate each other, because they would eradicate each other. One wouldn't win over the other. Both would cease to exist. Well, what does that have to do with this thing? Oh, that in that game, in that understanding reality, in our perceptions, it's easy to frame one thing as a violation of anything that attempts to or aspires to be an absolute. And I'm one of those people that's like, well, I don't really think that absolutes exist, right? Something as an example is that I would like to posit that I think, and I've talked about this before, forgive me for revisiting it, but common sense is sort of held in a sort of irrational place of common sense. It bootstraps itself, maybe with some mind magic, as existing when it probably doesn't actually exist. Like, I can't claim to have met so many people that to be able to make any absolute statements, right? But one of the most powerful things I think is true is that there very rarely are there any absolutes. Most things posited in absolute terms are inherently wrong, because they aren't going to be as absolute as any one mind might conceive of them. and that there are too many factors at work and involved, making sure that nothing can be absolute. Just like no ethnic bloc is some monolithic voting thing, although numbers add up. When trends occur, humanity isn't one concrete absolute thing or another, and most of the groups that we imagine ourselves in aren't any kind of absolute anything, but we habitually sort of choose to ignore that fact that nothing is absolute in the universe and make radical absolute statements about the universe and take them to be true until reality like shatters them in our face. And I know that because I've gone through it myself, and I've seen plenty of other people go through it themselves and sort of come to some realization that, oh, right, that is not how it goes. Do I strive to act with integrity? Absolutely. Might some people think I have zero integrity for whatever reasons? Probably. Might I be accused of spreading misinformation or disinformation? Quite likely. But we live in a world where everyone thinks everyone is fake news, right? Like in a cancel plus society, in a post-cancel culture, where everything is to be cast aside and thrown out with the bathwater immediately, which seems to be, the driving trend. How do we ever spiral back out of control? Will pledges like that work? Maybe. I mean, attempts of something like that, of setting some sort of communal standard like that, will most certainly work. There are obvious social, economic, and political statistical facts, things that are commonly experienced and measurable and repeatable and verifiable, and aren't being manipulated. And then there are things that are increasingly less easy to verify. And there's stuff that's just obviously bullshit, getting peddled around with the same brute force as fact. Now, I hope it's always been clear to anyone listening to my podcast that I'm not preaching like I think I know anything, some magical, special thing that makes me more important than anybody else. Most certainly not. I'm just an ordinary, everyday Joe Schmo, willing to audio journal about my wild, crazy, fevered, socio-political, economic opinions, and how I would, in an attempt to try to model the literature that I want to create that is based on commenting on the real life politics and projecting a little bit into the future, right? But I haven't talked about any of the tabs I queued up. Oh, let's pause for a hot second and think about how the world is shaped around us based on how much or how little information is shared. I want to say a shout out to those sources that have acknowledged American Samoa as a U.S. territory covering 7 different Pacific island and atolls is voting today along with all those 14 states in Super Tuesday. I had no idea because, and not to pass the, I obviously didn't do enough research. I didn't ever ask the internet all the voting jurisdictions in the, for every single last one. But on this page where I had previously read to you the delegate count that I had queued up for today, when you clicked on the one drop down to see the states by date, it doesn't list American Samoa. It just lists the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 states that vote on March 14th. So, way to go, guys. Whoever coded that. No, I'm not here to bitch and moan about that. I'm here to apologize. I didn't know. I mean, I presume that they voted at some point. Just like Puerto Rico gets the vote at some point, because they are America. Although a lot of Americans probably have no idea, as they often don't. No offense, not trying to slander anybody. That's just a real life observational thing. And I myself was sort of like unawares until when going to actually where did I see it first? They mentioned it. Oh, Ali Velci on MSNBC. Don't sue me, guys, just for saying their names. I was flipping through, trying to catch the latest headlines, make sure nothing crazy was going on. Everything seems to be drumming along at the usual sort of humdrum, everyday, normal sort of rate of things. And he pointed out sort of like during like a signing off to commercial break. And then when I got onto the interwebs, I see that Bernie Sanders, he tweeted, "Today, 14 states and American Samoa are voting." Oh, and there's an app that you can download, the Burn app, so that you can talk about Bernie Sanders and why you should vote for him. I'm not making an endorsement. I'm just reading facts on a page off of the interwebs. And I find that all fascinating. And I was a little bit like disappointed in myself not knowing. So shout out to American Samoa. And may those, however many out of the 55 some odd thousand people who are, the population of that delightful territory in the South Pacific, may your vote be counted and count, right? Because that's what we're trying to achieve. Back to this memory of this thing. America's largest voting bloc is non-voters. I'm going to invite you to consider that for a hot second while I take a break. And I might talk about that at length in the next segment, because I'm just going to be doing like an all-day lounge around and podcast with you in kind of hopefully not too long, blocky segments, and try to keep it intelligent and savvy. But I'm also treating it like a holiday. So I might totally just I fail to come back on the air if I get too into the holiday mood of celebrating something. No, I'm kidding. No, I think it's an important thing, right? I sit on the fence, and I observe. And I think I was mentioning a day or two ago that, on cynical days, it's easy to buy in to think, oh, God, yeah, everyone who's ever said that voting doesn't count for anything and it's a waste of time is right, and we should all just break the system by non-participate, and some sort of veto. It's a catch-22, right? Because that would be easy to organize, I guess, arguably, if you got people mad enough. But also, it would let whatever disastrous backup plan of non-voting gets played out when the system, because they can still, like the delegates and super delegates can still do what they do, even if, let's say, literally 0 people voted one year. Like, what would happen? There's a short story for you. And I'm going to put a pin in that and say that I'm going to try and explore trying to write that short story might be like in the not too distant future. I doubt I'll get it done before the election, but there you go. An idea that just sort of popped out of my head because we're all talking about, we're here doing this podcast thing. But yeah, imagine that. But conversely, flip it around. Imagine if that entire non-participatory bloc just all in on voting for something, even if it was an absurdist something other than the 2 main people, in order to just break the system, right? Because if everyone backs away, maybe the system has ways of coping with that, and it ends in a result that, as a protester or a member of political resistance, let's say, you may not really appreciate the consequences of. But if you want to like really see what happens, if you can really manifest change, by setting aside whatever critiques you might have from whatever political ideological camp you might be from, just go with an all-in, slam the vote and vote Roger Rabbit, right? Like force or a real person, but that isn't on the ticket. Like who would be funny? Who would be interesting and weird? I don't know, like some sort of yoga teacher lady, like a Marianne Williamson, but less like unelectable. Some cool yoga lady couple, and just voted them in. Just like I'm just pulling for examples and not being very strong. But insert whatever interesting progressive protest nominee that would make sense, but that you could also theoretically motivate the entirety of the non-voters who could theoretically, in less than one election cycle, like get actively involved in voting and start massively moving the needle, right? Of course, that opens a huge question, like, of that block, what are their demographics? Where do people sit who don't vote? Where would they line up? How would it play out with this spread of candidates? I don't know. Questions to come back to. But I'm going to take a break, make myself a cup of tea, check the news, make sure nothing crazy's happened. And I'll leave you with these final facts, friends. According to the infinitely live updating information panel on Google for 2020 United States presidential primary election results on the Democratic tab, Bernie Sanders has 60 delegates and Joe Biden has 54. Top 02 Super Tuesday. And it'll be hours before we get any results. So it's not like I'm going to be on the air the entire time, but I am going to come back once I see stuff and digest it and give you guys my opinions on it. Until then, I hope and entreat you to be good humans and to really contemplate, what would a world in which we just flooded the vote? What would that be like? What would that turn out like? Wouldn't it be fun? And could we do anything about that now? Is it too late? Could we just flood the November vote? And even if you didn't, do you get excluded from final vote if you're not in the primary? I don't know. Questions to dig into and find out for future episodes. Until next time, I have been your eccentric and self-admittedly not most well-informed of all possible audio hosts, but I'm earnest and sincere, raw and unscripted, the rascal you love to listen to ramble, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.